week's live Breakfast Club guest is
The Backyard.
Tune in this Friday at 8:35am, or even better, show up in person. Nice.
Are our affairs current?
Richard, great question.
The Wire.
You're on 95 BFM. I'm Simon. This is The Wire. It's just gone 17 minutes past the hour. Now, I've got Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz on the line. Selwyn, are you all set for today's budget announcements?
All set this end, Simon, yep.
Okay, so in terms of what we don't know about the budget so far, any predictions?
Certainly, it's been well sown into the mainstream media by the government that, and there's the New Zealand Herald did it really well with all
sweet and sour.
The sweet and sour. John Armstrong kind of gave it that kind of flavour, and I thought that was right on in a sense. And the only thing of measuring the two is how much sweet is in the mix and how much sour. So we'll get to know that at after 2 o'clock, I guess. Audrey Young also did a piece where we know that those who have been able to invest in second homes, holiday homes, batches, yachts, that type of thing, that there's a loophole that's in the tax area that some of them are taking advantage of, where they might put it out for rent during the holiday period, but they cause a tax write-off in a sense where the cost of that house over the year can be offset against the income. So the government's going to tighten up there, I think, Simon, as well.
Selwyn, that loophole, is this a token gesture, though?
Yeah, I think, I kind of see it in this way. I think what is happening here...
I mean, how much money is involved?
Yeah, well, those kind of equations will come out from Treasury after the budget announcement this afternoon. We'll really be able to give answers to those. At the moment, it'll be just an estimate, and we don't know whether or not it's trivial or whether or not it's significant, really. Yeah, all that detail is, as they say, the devil's in the detail, and we'll be able to answer that probably, by later today if people were interested in that kind of thing. With what we do know here, though, is I think there is a rhetorical position that the national-led government has taken in the last couple of weeks. It knows it's been behind the eight ball all this year, and it knows that it's vulnerable to attacks where it appears that the sectors of New Zealand society that are shouldering the burden of the indebtedness the country is in is really from the middle income New Zealand and those who are kind of in the areas where they're not making much money or they're really in poverty. Now, the government has kind of been sowing these kind of things, and kind of it's a rhetorical position, I think, Simon, where it's saying, we are going to be targeting those who are well off in this area. But once again, the detail of how significant that kind of that move is will be known later today. We do know too that as John Armstrong wrote in the New Zealand Herald this morning, that it's the fine print that you have to look at to see really where the negativity aspects are, the consequences, where it's going to bite.
That's a really interesting point. I think it was paragraph 16 of Hekia Parata's speech about education funding priorities that she mentioned
15th paragraph,
15th, that class ratios would change. Where else have we seen this fine print tactic emerge?
Well, let's look at this announcement that we just mentioned, for the holiday homes and the yachts, etc. One would suspect that the amounts that your question was a natural one. What numbers are we talking about here? What volumes can we expect to benefit the New Zealand economy by closing this loophole? Now, those kind of measurements, if, for example, they are, it's just basically window dressing, that they're trying to actually make themselves look better by singing a song where they're kind of making a move on the more wealthy, well then you'll find that detail hidden away or almost impossible to actually digest. So that's a good example probably of what to look for later on. I think too that the government has got to a stage where like last night on television news you saw people living in caravans. Now, people have lived in caravans in New Zealand for a long time. The evidence of poverty and the degree of poverty has been in evidence in this country for a long time, and subsequent governments have not really tackled that problem. It's not all National's fault, but National is the party on the spot at the moment, and it's done squat little to actually address in my view, the needs of those who are falling away from being able to have a shot in this country. The issue of housing, for example, the National Party has been, while it's been in government, has been tampering around with New Zealand state housing stock, for example. Would like to see, I think a lot of people would like to see in this budget some sort of indication that demonstrates a pragmatic move to solving the overcrowding problem in New Zealand and also the homeless problem in New Zealand, like we're seeing in Christchurch.
I mean that's a very pressing problem, but also the education budget. It seems to be the decks seem just to be shuffled around. I'm looking at things like, for instance, limiting the student allowance to I think it's the first 4 years of study. What's that going to do in terms of higher learning for New Zealand, and in terms of getting our economy going? I'd just like to bring in this as well, is that the other day I actually heard an economist mention that government policy in New Zealand since I think 1960 has actually had no effect on GDP, and that it's disconnected from whatever the government does.
That's an interesting theory, isn't it? One would imagine that the more the government disinvests in the actual running of the country, and we're seeing trends of that kind of thing materialising now, that would become even more so. With respect to the education and tertiary education policies, I think you're right. We need to look at the detail there. We can establish what the trends have been. They were right at the start of the National League government's term in 2008, where it capped tertiary numbers at a particular level, I think 2007 level by memory. So what it did is it basically did not allow, while the population in the areas of the age areas that would traditionally be going to university and tertiary study, they were capped at a level that was under the actual want or the need in that area. So we saw a spill-off and increase in the youth and early 20s age groups in the unemployment benefit, etc., etc. Now, all of those kind of areas, I suppose, can be referred to as cul-de-sac policies, that where a gate is shut, there is spill-off into other areas, and it's identifying really the impact on where that spill goes. From an economics point of view...
It goes to Australia, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it does in a sense, or onto the dole queue, or into situations where you're living with a whole lot of other people in one place, and where you're sharing all of the communicable diseases and etc., etc. And then from an economics point of view, you see a blowout in the health budget trying to cope with all of that acute illness. We saw that pattern develop by mid-1990s, and we're seeing evidence of that developing right now again here in New Zealand.
So the budget announcement is at 2 p.m. today.
Yep.
Have you got your iPhone budget app yet?
I better do and download on that. I haven't even got round to it. Isn't that a shocker? Supposed to be a bit IT savvy and haven't even done that yet. But I think, really, just in summarising the end, I think for you, Simon, I think that, there are signals that have been around for some time that the National Party in government is listening to some of the concerns. The challenge is for Bill English, as a centrist positioned and reasonably minded kind of politician, to actually address, one, getting New Zealand back, yes, into surplus, but also balancing the requirement that people actually need to ensure that they have some means of progressing their lives in this country. He may have to resist some of the more right, in my view, neoliberal kind of thinking within his caucus and cabinet to come through with a budget like that. It's going to be a zero budget. It's going to be a sweet and sour budget, but let's see if there's any elements of fairness in it. If there is, it's probably a Bill English budget. If there isn't, well, some of the ideologues in the National Party have won that argument.
Well, I guess it's how much MSG they put in the message, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Or vinegar, yeah.
Yeah. All right, hey, Selwyn, as always, very good talking to you today, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, mate. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Our Wire.
That was Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz. What are your thoughts on the budget? Give me a text. Whether you're coherent or not, I might just read your comments on